All right, me. It is January 30th of 2024, and I've just finished reading The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I finished reading this while I was substitute teaching. I was very lucky to have a pretty significant time in which I wasn't in charge of any classes, so that I could cry while reading the ending. Because I'm a little baby, but it's a good book, right? I love The Book Thief. This is one of those books that I think for people my age and then maybe a little bit older is really like a pretty pivotal book that got chosen for free reading but was never taught. And then like it's one of those books that I don't think it's going to go down as a classic, but I think it's going to go down as a very important book to a lot of personal lives, right? And the reason for that is because this book does something fascinating, right? In which Markus Zusak makes our narrator death, right? It is the embodiment, the actual physical person of death. My cat loves to cough at wonderful times. But it is such a different view of it, right? Because in this version that I have, he has some notes at the back of like 10 questions about the book, and one of the things that he answers is, well, you know, how did you make the narrator death, or like how did you come to this? And he said, you know, it's a struggle, right? Because the book is inherently about is involving war, right? And within war, it is a struggle, right? But also there's this pervasive idea that war and death are best friends, and really this kind of flips it on its head, in which instead of death being this kind of creepy embodiment or like someone that enjoys this, it is someone who is exhausted by all the things that they're seeing, right? And you know, it leads to a very, very different idea of what's actually happening, right? But yeah, The Book Thief is fascinating to me. It's what, like I said, I think it should go down as classic. I don't think it will, right? But I think it is a fantastic book in a lot of different ways, because we get a lot of great parallels that are happening throughout the entire thing, right? Yes, Cat, it is a very good book. We got a lot of different parallels that are going on throughout the entire thing. The writing is beautiful. The similes, the metaphors, the imagery is just fabulous. It's so wonderful. And then we also get this struggle, right, of where like, how does one exist in such tragedy, right? We have two different characters, right? We have Death, the embodiment of death, and we also have Liesel, who have only ever existed in tragedy, right? Death only ever gets to come or gets to be present during tragedy. And with Liesel, right, we have this constant ongoing thing of where like death seems to kind of hang on her, right? And she witnesses so much death, but also just so much cruelty in the world, right? And it's a question of how do you exist and continue to exist when you have to constantly deal with all these things, right? And also, you know, what does it mean when things are happening to you versus when you have to actively participate in it, right? Both Death and Liesel, they don't actually actively participate in the cruelty and the death that is surrounding them, right? They don't, right? They're onlookers, and then they pick up the remnants and they move on, right? Versus God, what's his name? The other one, Michael. Michael, it's a German last name. Holzfell, maybe. But he is only introduced at the very, very end of the book. And he is the older of two sons of some next door neighbors of Liesel and the Hubermans. And they are Michael, when he comes home, right, he has just participated in and has been sent home from Stalingrad, which is arguably the worst non-American event that continuously happened throughout the war, right, of just how horrendous it was, right, just for not, I wouldn't say necessarily casualties, I don't remember how many casualties occurred there, but just the conditions that they were forced to live in, right? And within that, right, he comes home, and within the next couple months, he takes his own life because he has this immense guilt about the fact that he's living, right? Because unlike Liesel and Death, who have only ever watched it happen and then had it happen to them, right? He has actively participated in this violence and this cruelty, and therefore, and this drives him to feel this guilt, this immense guilt that exists about the fact that he is living, right? We also have this kind of constant thing of like, you know, right, the reason why we have Dominoes as the main cover picture, I would argue, is because we have this constant reminder as well that like both good and tragic things have unintended consequences that either can destroy us or help us immensely, right? And you know, we're constantly seeing those things, right? We're constantly seeing that, like, you know, decisions made in World War One by Hans then affect decisions that are made in World War II 20 years later, but then are also, we see it in everyday acts, right? Of where the tragedy of our decisions is that we don't get to understand their outcomes until they're here, right? And we don't get to change those outcomes in the way that we would like to, right? We don't inherently, we don't get to choose the outcome. We can lead ourselves to the outcome, but we don't get to choose them. And we see that a lot, right? Of where either people think that they're doing the right thing or the people think they're doing the wrong thing, and it ends up being the opposite of that, right? Or through flukes, things happen, right? Lots of that going on, right? It to me is just really this embodiment of, like, especially when it comes to war, in that sense, that like we can only push forward in the way that we think is best, right? And as history has taught us, lots of those ways are wrong, and there are a few that are correct, right? One of the notes that are made at the end of the book by Markus Zusak is that one of the reasons that he wrote this book in this way is because a lot of these you know, young adult type, middle age, like middle school type books that involve the World War II and the Nazis and things like that. A lot of that struggle comes down to, like, you inherently have to present it a certain way, right? Because we want kids to understand that the complete and absolute discrimination and the active violence against another group of beings simply because they exist is bad, right? We have to present it that way. And Markus Zusak really wanted to show that, like, hey, even in this subsection, right, there were still some people that were afraid and just had to do it because they had to do it, right? Because they had to do it to survive, right? Which is not a good argument, I'm going to say, right? But it is one of those arguments that can exist and does exist in a culture and in a society that is so hyper-focused on violence being one of the main answers, right? Is that because if you live in a society where speaking out leads to violence, well, therefore no one can speak out, right? You have to be anti-violence to make things better, right? Or get to a society that is functioning, right? And being a society and a culture that is so focused on violence and on war as being your top answer to things does not make things better, right? We get a few class things here, right? Not super in-depth, but it's very, very clear that we have this issue that's going on, especially in regards to how do we spend and save money during a war in which everyone's rationing, right? But some people get better rations than others, right? Also within that, we have, the poor part of Mulking, which is where Liesel and the Hoonmans and the Steiners live. And then there is the part of the world that they get to view but never really be a part of, right? Which is, where the mayor lives and where all these effectively aristocrats of Mulking live, right? And we end up fighting this battle at the very end of, like, or I should say throughout this entire thing of, right, where the idea that, right, we all play the same exact part in terms of the economy, it doesn't actually exist, especially not in wartime, right? In order to get the economy to stay functioning, right, people have to spend, right? And it's one of those things in which, well, the poor families can't spend because they don't have money, right? They're relying on their rations at this point. And so it is the upper class that has to spend money to then move things and continuously move things around. But what happens is, well, in order to preserve their own lifestyle and preserve their own way of viewing themselves as above, because they are the upper class, they also stop spending money. Because, right, if you spend too much money, then you start lowering yourself and raising everyone else, right? And so we have this whole thing in which, like, this entire city has effectively removed itself from its own economy, right? And no one's spending money on anything. It's just all based on rations, right? So that's that. Anything else I really want to talk about with this book? Any other big things? There was another big thing that I want to talk about with this book in regards to it, right? Oh, the other big thing about this book, right? Actually, there's two more big things about this book. One of the other big things is the way that this is framed, right? Is that we are reading it from the narrator's, from Death's perspective on this, and within that, right, we have these kind of cutaways that are kind of bolded about conversations or about thoughts that Death is having, right? And one of the big points, one of the biggest points is Death's very last line, which is "humans haunt me," right? Within that, right, it's, as explained by Markus Zusak, it's important that we recognize, or that it's important that Death recognizes that, like, he is not actively participating in any of this, right? He is just there to observe and then pick up the souls, right? it is humans that have brought this on themselves, and humans can, in the same moment, be the worst things to exist, but also have the most compassion of anything that has ever existed, right? And once again, we see this a couple times throughout the book, right? Of the immense cruelty that exists within this community, right? Within Nazi Germany, but also how compassionate an individual person can be, and how much impact a single person can make on another single person, right? And I think that's one of those things that, like, we have to, just as people, have to reconnect with, right? We understand that society has favorites, and society has an openness to exploitation, right? And we as the individual person have to then go beyond that cruelty and then say, no, I'm actively going to choose to be compassionate, right? That is up to the individual, right? Because society and the culture it's built on is inherently based on the fact that you can exploit and destroy people, right? The other thing that is much more personal to me is actually, this is the book where my senior quote comes from, and I had forgotten about it because I don't own my senior year yearbook, and I didn't really think about it a whole lot. But after the first march goes through town, and Hans Huberman, the father, goes and helps one of the Jewish people up to stand up, he realizes that he's made a huge mistake, right? Because now he's afraid that the SS or the Gestapo is going to come to his house and inspect his house, in which he is hiding another Jewish person, right? He is hiding Max Vandenberg in his house. And he's afraid because now he's helped someone who was Jewish publicly, that then his house is going to be searched by the Gestapo. And because of this, he has to force Max out, right? It's one of those things of where sometimes our actions, even if we intend it to be good, have a consequence that is crueler than we could ever imagine, right? By helping this one person that he did not know, Hans Huberman has just forced this person that he's been hiding in his house for 2 years out. Because now, if Max is caught in the house, then everyone is dead, right? And so within all of that, Hans Huberman says, I am kind and I am stupid, and therefore I'm the biggest, I'm stupid, I'm kind, and therefore I'm the biggest idiot on earth. Which did end up being my senior quote, which was not true. I was not very kind at that point in my life. And, arguably to this day, I'm still not the kindest person I should be, right? But that's that, right? That's my own personal connection to it. Like I said, I think this is a book that I don't know if this book can ever be taught in classes, right? It's too big of a book, right? I mean, it's, I think 450, 550 pages long, however long it is. But it is, I think, one of the most important books that I've read in my life, and I think should continue to be read in free time reading, not necessarily taught in classes. But that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak.